Comply or die. Comply or die. Comply.
Welcome to GRC Uncensored, an experimental podcast designed to elevate real conversations with GRC professionals, auditors, regulators, and those building programs around it. Your hosts Troy Fine and Elliot Volkman will offer unfiltered conversations that dig into the reality of how governance, risk, and compliance function that are often buried under millions in marketing spend. Now, on to your hosts.
Hello and welcome officially to episode 1 of our pilot for GRC Uncensored. I have with me our host, Mr. Troy Fine, or if you prefer, our GRC meme king, and a wonderful guest who's going to be able to kick us off with a topic which should hopefully make it pretty clear of what we're going through for this series. Now, just for a little bit of context before we kind of just jump right into it, in about 2 episodes, you will get a little bit of behind the scenes from Troy and I talking through why the hell we're doing any of this. We're not going to be just talking about controls and all these absolutely lovely and horribly boring things that come along with GRC, but instead, we're going to give you the uncensored version of GRC. So to skip ahead of that, just wait a couple episodes, you'll get some of that behind the scenes. So we're just going to jump right into this and go from there. But first, maybe we should introduce our guest. So we have Kendra Cooley, who has been at least in our cybersecurity world for a decade, probably a little bit more than that. And of course, has quite a bit of exposure to the wonderful world of risk and compliance and governance. In not exactly that order, but you get the hint. So Kendra, anything that you would like to add upon that? What's your general take on GRC? Is it a love-hate thing? You're obviously not specifically in a GRC seat, but yeah, what's your take?
It's definitely a bit of a love-hate relationship, I would say, depending on the day. I think, governance, risk, and compliance is one of those things that's really helpful as a security professional to be able to point to, especially when you're trying to influence the organization to move in a certain direction. But at the end of the day, there are certain things I think we can all agree that, just because a compliance control says that you should do something doesn't necessarily make it a security best practice, right? So it's love-hate.
Love it. That is
sounds
a great
more like
entry
a
point.
love-hate with the frameworks more than GRC. That's what that sounded like to me.
Fair. I would tend to agree.
All right, that is our great pivot point. So Mr. Fine, if you would like to tee up what we're going to be discussing this episode, we can go from there.
I think we're going to be talking love-hate relationships with GRC. I think that's a perfect segue into the topic today. But really, we just wanted to talk with Kendra or myself, right? I might add my own opinion here and there. I tend to
Hopefully.
do that if you follow me on LinkedIn. But, just talking about compliance, GRC, how it might be becoming a little bit more commoditized, how it might be losing its value and what its intended purpose is really supposed to be. We might touch on some other topics such as other cybersecurity realms that aren't necessarily compliance focused, but really getting down to maybe what's causing this, how do we solve this problem potentially, and what's really going on here, and how do small businesses or medium-sized businesses, how do they convince their leadership that it is important and not just box exercise. Hey, we are SOC 2 certified.
Right, so
that was a joke, people.
There's a lot
I
of
was going to
questions.
say, I can't believe you just said that word.
It's amazing how you can build a brand around SOC 2 certification when you don't even mean to. I'll just put it that way.
That's going to be our promo clip. I'm just going to put that out there. So
For sure.
that was a lot of information. So maybe we'll start with one question to kick it off. And then just for a little bit of a caveat, we will have a separate episode to specifically talk about, do you need a tool or technology to go through the GRC process? So we'll, I don't know, maybe touch on that a little bit, but let's zoom out and focus on that big picture. I think the starting question that we can look at is, are things like SOC 2 becoming SOC 2 in a box where organizations are, for their first time going through an audit, being asked for this thing, they don't really know how to go through it. They've never gone through the motion. I don't know. What's your hot take, Kendra? What is the state of these like entry level, compliant entry points?
The last several companies that I have worked for have specifically brought me in to build their security program because they want to go through the SOC 2 process. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these SaaS companies see that as their golden ticket in the door to even start having conversations with, especially, the medium or larger sized businesses. And so a few months ago, I think obviously this is where this conversation was kind of born out of. I made a post on LinkedIn about how I feel that, SOC 2 has really lost its value in a way, largely due to kind of these SOC in a box type platforms that are just helping organizations get through it. So painlessly, what is it, SOC 2 Type 2 in 4 minutes, I think is the tagline for some of these companies. And as someone who's taken multiple companies through this process on several occasions, I can't help but see those taglines and just laugh and be like, what a joke. It doesn't work like that.
That would be a little painful. I will say, at least having worked in that marketing seat,
Sure.
a lot of that was phased out, I think, fortunately, from exact feedback that you're providing. But maybe I'm wrong. Troy, are you still seeing some of that floating out there as our auditor who, I don't know, are they knocking on the doors like, yeah, this will only take 10 minutes, right?
I don't see that as much, probably because I was the one that brought it up when I saw SOC 2 in 2 weeks. I think when I initially I made a post about that, and that kind of got things moving. I think it actually translated into the auditor side as well, right? So a lot of companies come to us and just expect us to be able to do this in 2 days, or, okay, we do this, we have all these controls in place, we do this. Like, why does it cost so much money? Getting this quote for $5,000 and they can do it in a week and be done and give us a SOC 2 report next week. I can't planning in a week if I want to do this the right way or scope this the right way. So it is translating into, now that I'm doing the audit side again, when we talk to prospects, and they don't know necessarily what they're doing. They're just being told what to do, and they're seeing the market go a certain way. Sometimes I like to say it's the blind leading the blind, right? That unfortunately, that's kind of what's going on with the smaller companies. When you get the bigger companies, that people have like somebody like Kendra working for them, who've been through this before, they can kind of see through it a little bit. But yeah, we are still seeing it from, here's this silver bullet auditor, like, why is this taking you so long and why is it costing?
Yeah. And I mean, just to kind of add to that, I mean, again, I've had multiple experiences now walking into organizations where they're like, all right, how fast can we get this done? We feel like we're in a really good place. And I have to take a step back with them and be like, all right, well, you think you're in a good position. Let me just, get the lay of the land, see where you are. When I start poking around, and I'm like, y'all don't even have MDMs on your machines. You don't have 2FA enabled anywhere. This is not a good situation to be in, especially if you're telling me you want to kick off your SOC 2 audit in, 2 weeks, SOC 2 Type 2 at that. So a lot of, what I've had to do, especially in my career, is like step into these positions and get leadership to understand that, okay, I understand that you've been sold this, either product or pipe dream of, hey, you can get through this SOC 2 in less than a month, but that's really not the reality of the situation, especially if you want to go about this the right way. And sure, there are opportunities for shortcuts when it comes to completing some of these audits, but I've got a little bit of integrity and I like to make sure that things are done the right way. So it's an education, especially for the founders and the leaders, as well as helping to mature the organization, but also getting them to understand that compliance does not equal security. And I think we can all agree that likely, SOC 2, as helpful as it can be to get, your foot in the door with some of these larger organizations, especially as a SaaS company, but we know what goes into these audits and it doesn't make you secure. So
yeah, well, sticking to that topic, when you're working with a bigger company, are they devaluing SOC 2 when you give them a SOC 2 report? Are they just checking their box and don't care who the audit firm is? Are they looking at it closely more? Or have you seen any changes from that perspective when you're talking to these bigger companies looking at your?
I know for me personally, when I'm doing my due diligence on a company, there are certain auditors that if I see their name on a SOC 2 report, I pretty much throw in the trash because it's basically a rubber stamp audit and I don't hold any value to anything that's in it. And at that point, I transition to more of a questionnaire and asking for like actual evidence of myself. I kind of turn into the auditor a little bit. But I guess on the other side of that, from a customer perspective, for the last several companies that I've worked for, I haven't had an experience where a customer has been like, like SOC 2 isn't necessarily good enough. There have been situations where certain companies that I worked with, just given the industry that they're in, they don't really understand what a SOC 2 is. So it's been interesting to see, like law enforcement agencies and things like that. When we say, here's our SOC 2 report, they're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
So that's been interesting. But I've also seen a lot more requests for ISO certifications in the last, I would say, like 12 months or so. So that's been definitely a transition.
I need to check your trash to make sure that a report that we did not sitting in there.
It surely isn't.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I never really considered too that some companies might not even know what a SOC 2 is. And if that's your like security package, part of your security package to get them home on your security, and they don't know what it is, then it's what's plan B here? What do they ask for then? Are they sending you this 1,000-page questionnaire, or are they, I guess it depends how sophisticated their risk management.
Yeah, well, and that definitely is interesting, right? It does transition, I would say, from industry to industry. So again, the organization that I was working for previously that worked with a lot of law enforcement agencies, again, they didn't really know what the SOC 2 was. And honestly, from a due diligence perspective, they didn't really have a large list of things that they wanted to see. And I think a lot of that was just because of the fact that they just simply weren't used to having to ask for that information from vendors. And so, as part of our sales process, we wanted to get as much information in front of them as possible and explain our security posture. And they just kind of were overwhelmed, like, what is this? So it then becomes a little bit of an education back to them as well, which I enjoy doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I have another interesting question too. Are you seeing in your circles, your GRCs, security professional circles, bashing SOC 2 in those circles? Bashing might be the wrong word, but talking about the commoditization of SOC 2, any other compliance framework, and really not placing the value on it in terms of when they're evaluating a vendor. SOC 2, yeah, we have to check the box because our internal auditors say, yeah, we need to get this, but we're really going to do all these other things now because we really just don't believe in SOC 2. It's really
100%. 100%. A lot of the conversations that I have are definitely, more behind the scenes with, fellow security practitioners and things like that. But, when you've been through enough of these audits and you've seen how different auditors will audit them, it also kind of takes away, I think, like the seriousness or like how much you can actually count on what they're looking at for some of these audits. And that's also why I tend to stay away from certain audit firms that I know are just doing more of a rubber stamp. If you don't have an auditor that's like particularly tech savvy or really knows how to dive into the controls and get to what the heart of them are looking for, it's so easy to be like, hey, look over here. We don't actually have this really where it should be. But if you look over here, you can kind of dazzle them with compensating controls that are almost like irrelevant. Yeah. And so, yeah, definitely I've had many conversations with, fellow practitioners that are just like, yeah, whatever, like another SOC audit coming down the pipeline, another report to look at. It's gotten to the point where a lot of them are just kind of like skimming through these reports as like a check the box exercise, which is unfortunate because for those of us who are spending the time getting organizations ready to go through these audits and actually spending the time with the auditors and the thousands of dollars that it takes to get to the point of producing that report, it's like, all right, well, what's the point of this and how long are we going to stay on this train before something else comes up?
You're my favorite GRC person. It's an amazing first episode. I love it. It's great.
I just try to, say what I feel.
This is good. I mean, that's what we need. That's why we're doing this. I mean, this is authentic. And I already knew a lot of the answers you were going to say, right? Because I feel it too on my side. And it is unfortunate, but I'm hoping we can change it somehow.
Yeah.
Bringing it, making people aware or, hoping that it doesn't just blow up in our face one day.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that's the benefit as well of going with like more of an ISO certification is they are a little bit more prescriptive. So, when you get that sort of like reporter certification, you're looking at something that's been more thoroughly audited and they're meeting particular controls. But I'm sure, those of us on this call understand that, SOC 2 is a little bit more hand wavy and you can kind of get away with a little bit more. So you've got to actually take the time to read those reports and see what the controls are that they have in place. And that's kind of a pain.
Yeah, I get it.
All right, I'm going to throw out a question here. So if we hit our time machine and you go back to the first exposure that you had to compliance, maybe with SOC 2 or some other framework, hopefully it wasn't something more important like HIPAA. But back in that period of time when you were kind of alien to all of this, how did you navigate that situation? And do you sort of take that approach to the organizations that you enter and try to guide them through the same journey, so to speak, in a much abbreviated fashion?
Yeah. So actually, I think SOC 2 probably is the one that sticks out the most for me earlier in my career. This would have been like back in my duo security days, joining that team while they were going through their SOC 2 audit phase and just having absolutely no idea what any of this actually meant and learning. I mean, I had such an incredible team there, learning kind of the ins and outs of what all the controls meant and why they were important and how they benefited the security organization. So I would say that, yes, I definitely try and take a lot of those learnings forward with me into all of the other organizations that I'm working with to kind of give that like educational aspect of what this actually means. but also being realistic about it. I mean, I've had several situations where I've gone through, SOC 2 audits with organizations, and then, there's an incident, nothing like terribly serious, but an incident occurs and they're like, yeah, but we have SOC 2, like, how did this happen? I'm like, all right, y'all. So,
Didn't even make it through the first episode and that popped up.
yeah, exactly. So it's very much like an educational aspect or approach that I take with these organizations, just trying to help level set. And, the company that I'm working with now, we just recently went through our first SOC 2 audit for type 1. And I loved the approach that the auditor took, because he was like, this is a marketing tool. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that this report speaks to what you all are doing internally with your organization and really highlights, the good that you're doing from a security perspective. And I was like, actually, I like that you took that approach of calling it a marketing tool, because at the end of the day, I've been through this so many times, and I know that, yeah, you can end up with a SOC 2 type 2 that's clean as hell, but that doesn't mean that you're, exempt from hackers or, breaches or things of that nature. So I thought that was an interesting way of putting it from an auditor.
I'm curious to build upon that. So
Sure.
back, when you first started to do that, the technology that is available today isn't quite the same back then. You had a little bit heavier sets. You also had a lot of spreadsheets and all that. But do you feel like there was a little bit more trust and value in those compliance frameworks back then versus where they are today? And if so, you feel like there's some root causes there that hopefully will not get Troy and I in trouble?
Get us in trouble. It's fine.
So that's a little bit of where my post was, honestly, in the devaluing of the SOC 2, because back when I started my career and I first started, having to assist with companies going through the SOC 2 process and all that, like, you felt the weight, the lift of getting an organization through that, and the pressure that it put on the organization as a whole. Like, everyone kind of understood that they had a part to play, whether it be engineering and HR and security and IT, like all of these portions of the organization really had to play together in order to make this happen. The SOC in a box, I think, has been very transitional for how organizations view and approach the SOC 2. And I think in a lot of ways it has pushed the responsibility for something that really should be impactful across the organization to either one individual or one team, oftentimes like security or IT, or, just the poor person that's been saddled with taking a company through SOC 2 who has zero security experience. And so based on that transition of, having this like SOC in a box approach that we're seeing so often now, I do think that it's devalued SOC 2, because in my mind, like, it's taking away from the heart of what you're trying to accomplish there, which is ultimately like mature the security of your organization. And if you're just putting all that on one person or one portion of the company's responsibility, like, how impactful could it really be?
Yeah.
That was a lot of words.
No, that was good. I mean, it kind of touches on something I always think about, and I've been really wanting that. For a long time, I wanted to post something about it, but I haven't, because I haven't found the right words. So we're just going to discuss it right here a little bit. But
Sure.
You kind of touched on it before, but I've always felt that because of all this that's going on in compliance world, SOC 2 being center stage, just probably because we're in the United States and all these companies are doing SOC 2, but the SOC in a box approach, we're creating this false sense of security, right, for companies. Like you said before, like, leadership doesn't understand, hey, we're SOC 2 certified, how did we get an incident, right? And I always thought that, like, this causes, we're trying to ensure by creating these frameworks that you're more mature and more secure. By commoditizing it, we've actually made it worse potentially, because somebody thinks they're secure, however we want to define secure with a SOC 2 report, and then they become complacent. Oh, we don't need to do anymore. We don't need to improve, which is like the total opposite of what these frameworks are trying to get at, but that's what it's become. I'm curious if you feel that there's this false sense of security in the world because of compliance, and did we actually make things worse potentially by forcing people to do these?
I think potentially. Unfortunately, it has become the ticket in the door for a lot of these, especially, smaller startup SaaS companies. They understand that in order for them to even be able to get a conversation with some of these larger enterprises, they have to check that box. So that's where we're drawing the baseline. But what has that caused, right? That has caused all of these organizations to say, okay, how quickly can I get through this? How little money can I spend? And therefore, we're going towards that like sock in a box. Hey, you can get this done in 2 weeks. Oh, and by the way, we have all of these auditors that we already work with that, may or may not be getting a cut from working with us or something like that. And they're going to finish that audit for you in about 4 minutes and you're going to get that rubber stamp report. So yeah, it's, in my opinion, it has really damaged the reputation of SOC 2, the value of SOC 2. And, and a lot of the comments that I was getting on that post were like, well, did SOC 2 ever really have value? And I think it did. Personally, I think yes, maybe I was young, naive in my career, but it did feel like it held a little bit more weight than it does now. Now I get a SOC 2 and I'm like, all right, cool. Where's your penetration test that goes along with this? Like, where are all the other artifacts that I can check to see that you're doing what you should be from a security perspective? And that brings up a whole other issue, which is the crap penetration test they've got up there now.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting concept as well, because I see that a lot. Pen tests saying this is just a vulnerability scan. I mean, you could have ran your automated, here's 1,000, and none of them are even, they're all false positives, right? Not even providing any value anyway. And then they hand it off to the pen test. So I think it does go into other parts of cybersecurity, not just compliance. I think that's an important idea. I don't know enough about other areas of cybersecurity, but I can imagine that compliance is not the only part where this is potentially happening.
Oh, 100%. I think we're going to continue to see that grow. I mean, like, people are really starting to understand that there's money to be made in security. And unfortunately, there are not enough people that hold positions in organizations that know anything about security. So they're falling for the snake oil. And hey, like, this vendor is offering me something that, this other vendor was charging me $20,000 for. I can get it for $5,000 here. Like, why don't I go that route? Well, cheap is expensive and you get what you pay for.
I'm sure Elliot has some thoughts on that. Let's go with that.
Yeah, if you want me to go on a soapbox and rant, sure. But
Zero
definitely
trust
goes
is a
into the
perfect
quality
example.
of things. Yeah.
Zero trust. I mean, you hear on the buzzwords, AI is going to be next, right? Like, hey, every security.
Oh no,
in the world
AI
has
has definitely been here. It's quantum is next.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it's, how do you know what to believe? I mean, kind of scary, especially if you don't understand security and cyber and compliance and all these new things. It evolves so fast. How do you stay on top of it? I guess, how do you stay on top as a security professional?
I look to my network a lot. There's this crazy guy on LinkedIn named Troy that I follow who's always posting little tidbits.
I just post memes. I don't know if it's really helping people. I just will laugh.
It's
Honestly,
awareness.
It is. I look for them all the time and I always crack up. I think it's great. The awareness is there.
That's it. That's all I want. Just laugh.
Well, you've definitely built that brand for yourself. But no, I mean, I think, for me personally, it's a lot of just like looking to my network and trying to continue to learn and grow by going to conferences or just talking to other practitioners and just trying to expand my own knowledge and mindset. But I'm also like a fairly opinionated person and I'm okay with making my opinions known. So
that helps. Then people will tell you their opinion.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
More so behind closed doors, which is maybe one of the reasons why we're elevating these conversations to limelight.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, in terms of like, how do we fix this? Like, how do we, kind of start to maybe add value back into SOC 2 or even just see like a positive change in the security industry itself? I think, individuals who know better have to be willing and able to stand up and say, hey, this is not acceptable. I know for me personally, like, I've gotten many, especially penetration test reports from potential vendors, and I've sent it back to them and I've been like, this doesn't count. This is a vulnerability assessment. This is not a penetration test. And they just don't know better. So like, I've spent a lot of time with vendors, like sharing penetration testing firms that I like that, I know produce good work. And yeah, they're going to cost a lot more than this piece of crap that you just handed me. But at the same time, you're going to actually have value from it. And honestly, like, it's just really sad and disgusting to me that people are paying even $1,000 for a burp suite scan. You can buy a pro license of burp suite for $500 and run your own damn scan. Stop scamming people. It's bull.
Yeah. No, listen, everything you're saying is correct. And I think it takes people like you to stand up and speak up and let people know. Taking that back to compliance a little bit, it's the same idea, right? You said that we need to check your trash can, right? Because it's not providing any value if it's a certain, you've developed a certain optics in certain firms, right? So to speak, wherever that came from, and everyone has their own opinion on audit firm. But I do think it takes that in order to change, right? I always say the only way it's going to change is if AWS or a bigger company will say, hey, we're not going to accept this SOC 2 report and we don't want to work with you anymore. If somebody started doing that, then I think we would have like major changes in the chain. But I'm not sure that's happening. It's happening in little places here and there, because I hear sometimes people like you or they'll post on LinkedIn, like we don't accept reports from certain firms, but I've never actually experienced it. I've never seen somebody's like, when I do audits, because we always do vendor management, I've never had a client tell us like, well, we didn't accept that client's that audit report because they were using a certain firm. So I've never seen it person, but maybe people just aren't telling. I don't know.
It very well could be that. And I mean, to be fair, I've never had a situation where it has been a vendor that would be like scoped into a SOC 2 audit, meaning like they're a sub-processor of ours or, a crucial part of our infrastructure that I've had to push back on and be like, this is crap. It's usually just the smaller vendors or, the ones that are newer in the space that are, performing some like kind of niche functionality or activity for us that I've really had to push back on. But I 1000% agree. If AWS starts pushing back and saying, nah, we're not going to accept this particular either audit firm or even SOC 2 anymore, like it's just not good enough for us anymore, that's going to be a huge shift and a huge change in the security industry. But what's next? What do we follow that up with?
ISO.
Everyone going ISO?
ISO, right? We'll have the same thing. Like that's
sure.
Maybe that's the reason they haven't done it. They don't know what to do next. Maybe they are thinking that. But they have to check their own boxes from a risk management perspective, right? Because if something happens, they're going to be able to show their people, like, did all our due diligence and look.
Yeah.
They got a SOC 2. Go talk to, if it's a bad SOC 2, that's not my problem. Go talk to them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, let me turn the tables now and ask a question back to you all. Do you think that kind of the lack of laws, regulations, things like that we have in the US around security are allowing us to stay very stagnant in what's acceptable, what's required for organizations in order to handle PII or, sensitive data?
Well, Troy, you and I just had this conversation on the other podcast. So I'm going to leave that to you. You had very neutral and logical, I think, take on that one. I am more of a ranter, but I let Neil do most of that for me. So yeah, let's start with you. What's your take?
Well, yeah, that's a tough question. The problem is, I think we'd have the same issue even if government got them, to be honest. If there were laws that were set, I guess I'll take a step back because they do have laws around FedRAMP, right? So government does say if you're an agency and you're using a cloud service provider, you have to do FedRAMP. And FedRAMP's a beast, right? Depending on the level you have to do. So in that case, that probably made it a little bit worse because there's a lot of money being spent on it and people don't understand, like, is FedRAMP really helping me? We almost have the opposite with FedRAMP, right? They make you do all these things and it becomes like so expensive and it's like, this control like really matter for us. All this, blah, blah, blah. So in that case, I think government kind of went too far. That's what government does. But if we're saying government overseeing the private sector and requiring it, I think then we just get the same commodity, right? Because the government doesn't have the scalability to enforce or care. If you think about government, they'd have to set up a whole new agency to be like, we got to review these SOC 2 reports and make sure they're quality and do all this. It's taken 6 years for the DOD to even get CMMC through the door and get those rules finalized. I don't think that it would change much if they were trying to govern the private sector, at least in my opinion, because I just don't think they don't have the scalability to do it. I think privacy might be a different story. I think obviously privacy requires regulation because people just don't know what to do. They're going to take advantage of people's data without it. We see that all the time, but the government's trying to do too much, right? I think they need to start off really small and be like, okay, we're going to have a GDPR in the US or similar law. It's going to have 3 things, right to be forgotten. You have to tell them like where it's going, and you have to have a privacy policy that they can opt out of all these different things they want to, all their data subject. And we're trying to make it political, right? So because they're making it political, they never made anything through, and then we don't have the GDPR like law. So we're trying to run before we even walk. And that's why we're seeing the states do all their things. And so now there's going to be 52 state, 100,000 countries with their own privacy laws. And people like Kendra are going to have to figure out how to comply with all of them.
Yeah. I'm going to have so many spreadsheets that I got to track.
That's right. That's what I was having. And then we're back to the discussion. Did we actually help anything?
Yeah.
When there's so much to try to figure out, it's like in your mind, you're like, okay, right to be forgotten. That's probably in every single law. We better make sure we have a good right to be forgotten process.
Yep.
But all this other stuff over here, I can't worry about that in California and Utah and Virginia. What are the common things among all of them that we can do and make?
Exactly.
That's a challenge.
Yeah. And you've got like CCPA that's kind of like setting the tone for a lot of those, conversations and the development of those laws and regulations. But yeah, so each individual state starts coming up with their own little individual versions of that. I mean, I think we've even seen with FedRAMP, like TextRAMP and all of the other states that have individualized, the RAMP process and the difficulties that kind of come along with that. So it makes sense.
And people say compliance isn't security. That's where all this comes from, right? Because I have to spend 6 months trying to figure out what all this means while my company is, while nation states are knocking on my company's door. I'm trying to figure out, how do I comply with TextRAMP? What is TextRAMP? What is state ramp? How does that meet FedRAMP? And meanwhile, the actual security kind of gets forgotten.
Falls by the wayside, right? Yeah. And then kind of back to the initial thing that you said at the beginning, which was once we achieve that SOC 2 or whatever that compliance framework is, like companies just kind of think, okay, cool. Like we're good. We don't have to further invest in actual security now because we've got this really cute little seal on our website, which makes my job definitely as a security practitioner a lot more difficult of having to go back and say, no, I need more money. Please.
Yes.
Any more stickers is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to need to have Kendra on again for another episode. There's a lot to talk about.
Happy to.
We'll see if she approves all the edits and whatnot. We get through there. Yeah, but Troy, I definitely agree. I think at the federal level, privacy would be a great starting point. And I don't see there being like a world where they would try to govern the private sector for something like SOC 2. Plus, if we're, looking at a comparative stance, they have introduced some stuff for publicly traded companies where there's the disclosure rules and all that. But, it's still a little bit early to tell. But anytime that we've seen stuff like that, organizations of that magnitude and of that revenue basically just treat it as like a piece of doing business. So if it is just enforcement through fines, like they don't give a shit. Until people start going to jail or there's direct action that's taken that has larger, dire consequences, I don't think that there's going to be much done out of it. So on the flip side, and this is more wishy-washy fluffiness, but we have things like secure by design, which are sort of like these collaborative industry adopted guidelines that, they don't have consequences. They're just industry best practices. And if you do these things, that adds and reintroduces trust and credibility into it. I would love to see, maybe ISAC is already doing something like that, but like an organization like them to build something across many different GRC professionals to develop something like that to increase those higher standards. Now, I know AICPA and all of them are creating harder stances on some of what they see root causes for that situation, but it would be ideal for a more neutral organization that is representative of all the professionals to kind of chip in. Only because as much as I would love to see regulation move something forward, like the carrot and stick thing, it's usually more of a stick and the money just, they don't care. They just pay the fine.
Even with secure by design, they're requiring federal agency, their cloud service providers, they have to do this. It's with secure by design, but they do this attestation for secure development framework, I think, SDF. It's really just an attestation letter that you have to send in. I mean, you don't want to lie to the federal government, right? But like you're being forced to sign an attestation. I mean, I guess that's good. All that tells me is if something goes wrong, they now have the ability to say, you signed this attestation and now we can sue you and regain all this money back that we lost. That's what it felt like to me. It felt like more of a liability thing than an actual, like, we want to improve security thing.
Yeah, that's more of a slap on the wrist than anything, if that.
Yeah. So that's where we're at.
I think
That's it. This is,
yeah.
how do we
Is that
solve
episode
all
one?
that? That'll be the next 10 episodes we talk about. At least.
I look forward to those episodes because I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement like here. I know for me, again, being the person who oftentimes has to review these vendors and make the decision as to whether or not, we can use them, is the risk too high? Have they provided the right documentation? It's just the answers to those questions is becoming so much harder to find because of how convoluted the market has become with rubber stamp auditors and, the folks that are doing the testing on these applications to make sure that they're secure, just not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So the artifacts that I have access to, how much can I trust them? And so a lot of times it just becomes gut reactions. And, you can send a billion questionnaires, but at the end of the day, that's no different than signing an attestation. I can send you a 50 question questionnaire. You can answer that however you want. I don't have any way of proving that you're doing what you actually say that you're doing. So it would be nice to get to a point where I felt like, hey, I had this piece of paper that gave me all the answers and gave me that comfort deep down inside that I'm not signing the business up for too much risk. But you probably won't get there. But that's okay.
But that is a good topic. I didn't think about that one, but the pressure that people leading GRC teams might feel not having that comfort. I think that's an interesting discussion topic, right? Because ultimately, if something goes wrong, they might have a finger pointed at them, unfortunately, if they're in the wrong type of work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's becoming, I will say, more and more difficult for me. If you use kind of a, red, yellow, green type of assessment for vendor reviews, it's becoming more and more difficult to give any sort of green light, yeah, let's move forward on a vendor, especially if they have any access whatsoever to data that you deem sensitive or, are connected to business systems internally or, things of that nature. It's becoming more and more difficult to say, double thumbs up, move on ahead. I'm giving a lot of yellow, warning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very valid point. How could you ever be 100%? How could you ever be okay giving that green, knowing that it's nearly impossible?
It is. Yeah. It's really difficult. I think, from my side, a lot of what I try to do is just highlight the potential risk to the business. And at the end of the day, as a person who's leading a security program, it's my job to outline the risk to the organization. It's not my job to say whether or not we move forward with something. The business gets to make that decision. I just have to make sure that I've documented very well what the potential risks are. And, there's a lot of times where I have to say, I'm not able to verify, one way or the other, if this is actual factual information that they're doing this, but here's the risk of if they're not doing what they're saying. Now go with your gut. Is that something that you're willing to accept? And if it is, cool, I'm adding this to my risk register.
That's the way it should be done, right?
Yeah.
That is the way it definitely should be done. Not always how it's done. And I'm sure there's people working in organizations that don't realize that's how it should. Whatever. Hope for the best, right? But that's all part of it. I mean, yeah, this is all really good stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, that all comes back to commoditization, right? Because you're looking at a SOC 2 report, you're like, I don't trust this. This is a risk. We'll get our risk register.
It's true. Yeah. So we'll just wait for the next company to build a platform or something there that can help solve that issue and sell it to the masses.
There's one out there if you want me to go Google it right now.
Please
probably have really good AI too that can just guarantee no cyber attack. So
100%.
Always silver bullets. All right. That takes us to the end of the episode. So I'm going to close us out here. But if you manage to make it to 44 something minutes in minus editing, Troy and I would love your feedback to help us determine if we're going to move beyond the pilot of this miniseries, season, whatever. So throw it our way. If you see Troy post about this, rant, rave, give him some feedback, throw us some topic suggestions. We'll go from there. But Kendra, thank you so much for being here, being opened, having an uncensored conversation with us about GRC.
Yeah, not a problem. It was a pleasure to be the first official guest.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining. It was really fun. Good conversation. We might need to have part 1 and part 2, Elliot. I don't know.
You can always expand.
We might be able to break this one up.
Yeah, no worries. People will listen. It's a good chat. For those of you continue on, our next episode will be the actual, technically part 2 actually of this, which Kendra already alluded to, which is about the quality of audits. So we're going to focus on the product and the output of these things. We'll dig into something that may or may not end up in a trash can in Kendra's office. All right, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to GRC Uncensored. Your hosts have been Troy Fine and Elliot Volkman. To learn more about GRC, go to grcuncensored.com, subscribe to our newsletter on Substack, or join our GRC community on Reddit. Viewpoints expressed during the show do not reflect the brands, employers, or companies of our hosts, guests, or sponsors.
We live for fly, comply or die. Comply